Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here. I'm trying to find my little Zoom thing. Here we go. So if you are here for the 2023 Environmental and Reproductive Health Film and Webinar Series, you are in the right place. If you have any tech issues, please privately chat with our tech support, Fabiola, who is the frog icon that you may be seeing that says Center for Biological Diversity. And we really want to thank everyone for attending today's discussion, but I have a little bit of housekeeping. So everyone is muted so as not to be distracting. And you can also turn on closed captions or pick a preferred language for those captions under the little Zoom icon that says CC. So that's new to me this month, or this week, so I was excited to have that opportunity to share. The event will be recorded, and we're going to email you a copy next week. And if you are here for continuing ed units, I will also share those in a follow-up email, allowing you to submit to various credentialing bodies. So not everybody's interested in that, but it is, a draw for some folks to come to these webinars, and we're happy to have you and to help with that. So I am going to start us off with a quick introduction before moderating our discussion with our three wonderful panelists. But we are going to make sure to leave time at the end for open Q&A from the audience. But we actually had quite a bit of questions come in through the registration form. So I am anxious and excited to get to those. So my name is Kelly Dennings. My pronouns are she and her. For those that are unable to see me today, I'm a short, white, middle-aged woman with brown hair standing in my office. And I want to acknowledge that I'm on stolen Seminole, Timucua, and Miccosukee land where many individuals face displacement and suffering and hope one day they receive restorative measures. I spent 15 years working in waste, forestry, and conservation before getting a master's in public health. And I'm a campaigner with the Center for Biological Diversity, working to develop and execute campaigns that address the connections between reproductive health, gender equity, endless growth, and the climate and extinction crisis. So just a little bit about me. So before we get started, I'm going to ask Fabiola to open our first poll. So we just kind of want to get a feel for who is on the call today. So would you say that you work or volunteer? It's not always necessarily that you work at a location that does this, but it's your passion or your interest. Is that environmental health and justice, climate change, maybe public health and nursing, reproductive health or justice, alternative economies, waste, and then I learned from previously that I added in an other and a not applicable. So we'll leave that open for a little bit here to get a feel for who is on tonight's call, or today's call, depending upon where you're located. All right, Fabiola. Environmental health, 61%. That makes sense. But we also have some climate change folks on, and 56% other. I really need to know who these others are. You all will have to take the evaluation at the end and let me know what I am missing here. All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Fabiola. So just a quick introduction about the center if you're not familiar with us. We're a national nonprofit conservation organization that works through a combination of science, the law, activism, and creative media to protect wildlife in the wild places they need to thrive. On the screen, you're seeing all of our different programs. So now to set the stage. Environmental health refers to environmental factors and toxicants that create poor health outcomes for humans, and this includes chemicals, pollution, and climate change. And reproductive justice, as defined by Sister Song, is the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Unfortunately, threats to environmental health are putting reproductive justice at risk. So our capitalist society is impacting reproductive health in many ways through air, soil, and water pollution, climate change and extreme weather events, and the manufacturing of products with endocrine disrupting chemicals. You can read all about this work in a report that we put out last year titled The Influence of Environmental Toxicity, Inequity and Capitalism on Reproductive Health. And Malia just put a link to that full report in the chat. So I want to just note that our discussion today aims to provide a brief introductory overview of the relationship between the environment, racial inequity, reproductive justice, and their connection to capitalism. It does not intend, nor is it able to cover the full range of issues relevant to these complex subjects. So as the center continued to do research around this issue of market capitalism, we're identifying just one of these oppressive systems harming people on the planet. And when we talk about this, people really find it difficult to see beyond this system that is so ingrained in our lives. And the center really wants to change that, which is why we do these film series. So we just conducted a new US public survey to get a sense of Americans' existing knowledge of alternative economy principles, their perceptions of the role corporations play in the economy, and their willingness to engage in community-level alternative economy actions. So you can read more about that report in a link that I think Malia is also about to put in the chat. So lots of reports for you to read here later. So the goal of this film and webinar series is to continue the learning that came out of last year's report and to motivate folks to be change agents. Today, we'll be talking about the film associated with industrial agriculture. But we do have films associated with all these topics. So hopefully you join us next week for our fall film series and webinar, where we're going to talk about the harms associated with plastic products, again, through this extractive, endless growth economy lens. So if you are not signed up for that one, Malia is putting that in the chat also. Okay. So I have one more final poll before we move to today's discussion. So we will have Fabiola start that. If you want those continuing education credits, just click yes. If you don't want the credits, you don't actually have to click no. But for those that do want the continuing ed credits, you can click yes. And that will trigger me to give you a different follow-up email when we send that out next week. All right. No need to share those results, Fabiola. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm really excited to bring today's film, Children of the Vine, to you. I'm not going to provide too much background about this since we have the director with us, but it is an unsettling investigation into the controversial herbicide Roundup and its impact on public health. And I want to thank my colleague Nate Donnelly in our environmental health program, who's in the film, and I really appreciate him bringing this documentary to my attention. It's wonderful to have it to show. And Brian's been extremely generous. So for those of you that didn't get to watch the film yet, it will be open one extra day until midnight Pacific on Friday. So Malia just dropped that in the chat. So if you missed it and you're here for the webinar but didn't get to watch the film, you have an extra day. So, all right. Now, let me introduce our panelists. So first we have Brian Lilla. Hopefully I said that right again. Who has dedicated over 20 years to directing documentary films, large and small. From his award-winning investigative documentary, Patagonia Rising, to the intimate tale of two bondage models, Brian's work spans across themes of environmental, LGBTQ, and social justice. Brian thrives on getting outside his comfort zone to capture stories that bring voice to marginalized communities. His work has been broadcast on Netflix, Discovery Channel, and many broadcast outlets across the globe. And he lives in Napa, California with his wife and 2 children. All right, next with us is Obot Witherspoon, who serves as the Executive Director for the Children's Environmental Health Network. She is a current board member of the Pesticide Action Network of North America and has held past appointments on the Children's Health Protection Advocacy Committee for the EPA. She has a variety of publications and has won numerous awards. And she has a BS in Biology Pre-Med from Siena College and an MPH, woohoo, me too, in Maternal and Child Health from George Washington University. And she is a proud mom to 4 children. So there's some items going in the chat here from Nse. And Dr. Tyrone Hayes is our next professor, or our next speaker. He received his bachelor's degree from Harvard University and his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley. His focus is on the impact of chemical contaminants on environmental health and public health, with a specific interest in the role of pesticides in global amphibian declines and environmental justice concerns associated with targeted exposure of racial and ethnic minorities, and the role that exposure plays in health disparities. He's currently serving as Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and is an elected fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, which was just one of the many things also in his bio. So it's so wonderful to have you all here. I will stop sharing. And hopefully everyone is now seeing our panelists. All right. Well, I'm going to go around and we're going to have a few kind of rounds of questions here, some questions that I have, and then we will make sure to for sure leave time for Q&A from the audience. So Brian, I'm going to start with you. So this film was really about your community and your home. So, you know, besides this area in California being an important place for you personally, tell us what led you to make this film and what was your ambition for it?
Sure. The big motivation was that in 2015, our local paper ran an article that Napa County had the highest cancer rates for children in the state for the years, I believe it was 2012 and 13, and had the highest in the state, or second highest in the state for adults. And I just had a daughter the year before, and it basically freaked me out. And so I started asking questions about it, and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to make a documentary. And when I talked to an oncologist from Johns Hopkins University about, you know, why the cancer rates were so high in Napa, he said, that's a 10-year study that costs tens of millions of dollars and lots of research. But what you can do is you can use common sense. Look at what the major industry is in your area and see what the biggest amount of carcinogens are in your area. And I live in wine country, and so I started poking around. And when I asked about herbicide and pesticide and insecticide use in the county, and I looked at all the numbers, they've all been going down for the last 30 years, except for one. And that one was Roundup. So then my story switched from being, why are cancer rates so high in Napa, to, well, what's Roundup and is it a carcinogen? And so that's how the story began.
Wow. Yeah, it's so personal, and it's interesting how that evolves. When I talk to documentarians, they always kind of set out in one direction, and then you learn more, and well, that's wonderful. So I'm going to kind of open it up to anybody here on the panel. You know, what was your reaction to the film? What questions did it raise for you, especially as the experts in the room? What were your thoughts? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, hi everyone. I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here and among these two esteemed panelists as well. And Brian, we really appreciate this resource that you've provided to the entire public. I was infuriated, I'm sure like the rest of us, right? And I've heard too many of these stories. I've been at this well over 24 years now. And one of the worst calls you can get is a call from a parent who believes that they have this huge amount of guilt on their shoulders because now they have a diagnosis that they can now trace to an environmental exposure. And we get many cases related to pesticide exposures, even though they haven't gotten to the point of some in the film of getting help yet, or especially legal help. But right now they're in that very intense medical help phase. So it's infuriating as a consumer, as a parent, as a public health leader, the fact that, again, complete direct ways of ignoring science, covering up science, trying to entice and encourage our Environmental Protection Agency to also ignore science and kind of adjust things as needed so it could benefit the gross margins. No labeling, not even a hint of, or go to a website, which a lot of unfortunate consumer products still do, go to this website and then they might have the dirty details if you even have a chance to do that. So no labeling, no mention of reality of what the science was even showing with this Roundup product. Very infuriating. Complete direct focus on just keeping up with margins. And just focusing, I believe that we need to be focusing responsibility on the companies like Dow Chemical and in this case Monsanto, who are putting out these products with these known harmful chemicals, put the responsibility on them rather than the public. So the whole time that I'm watching the video, I'm just, again, more and more upset that people have so many things on their plate. This is totally unbeknownst to most people that they are even being exposed. I was thinking about migrant farm workers and other farm workers who are constantly frontline, and then their children are frontline. And many of these workers are women of childbearing age and or pregnant. So the fact that we're perpetuating these same, harms generation after generation is just really beyond me. And one question that it raised for me is how these execs can go to sleep at night, but also really think in their mind that they somehow are avoiding harm to their own children and their own grandchildren. So, whether you care or not about your own employees or the general public that is relying on your product in such, again, large margins, somehow there must be some disassociation that it's not going to be my family, it's going to be everyone else, and or just a total denial, again, that there's any harm whatsoever. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you.
Yeah, and I would agree. It was a wonderful and very timely film. And I think all that needs to be said was just said. I'm constantly amazed that there's sort of a lack of caring for not only the environment and not only for your employees and the people, but for your own families. I think these are people, for those of you who don't know, I was under contract actually for the chemical manufacturer when I started studying some of these agrochemicals. And so having been, quote, on the inside, I know that they know. So they're not waiting for the science. The same with the EPA. They know. The EPA is known for 20 years or more for many of the chemicals that we're talking about now. And it seems to be the margin. The bottom line is the money, and ignoring the impact on environmental health and public health. And somehow that every time I hear the story, I'm still amazed.
Yeah, I think it really touched on a lot of things, Brian, like the anger and the concern and the sympathy and the both of you are kind of bringing out this through line, right, of the corporate underlying systemic issue here. But let me step back a little bit from that then. That was just wonderful, but I know those topics are going to come up again. But Nse, so we talked about this. Brian's film talked about Roundup, and it actually specifically mentions, being found in breast milk. So this is just one example of how the chemicals infiltrating our reproductive system. So, tell me about the work that you're doing with the Children's Environmental Health Network and how it is impacting and intersecting with our reproductive health.
Sure, thank you. And I'll try to streamline. We've got a lot going on, and I know there's only so much time here. Climate change and the intersection between children's environmental health, climate change, and justice is a big part of our portfolio of work. As far as we're concerned, climate change is that umbrella exacerbator of environmental exposure challenges and vulnerabilities that children face, and women of reproductive age and reproductive health is totally vulnerable to. We're part of a founding member of the Climate Equity Collaborative that, as far as we know, is the only collaborative working in that space between, again, making sure that not just health, which is important, but children's environmental health and the impacts, the generational impacts, trauma, mental health, injury, not to mention increased mosquito and vector-borne illnesses and increased heat index and the implications to educational attainment and the ability to focus in school. There's so many of these factors that we're following. And just this week, Dr. Ami Zota at Columbia and her research group put out a report talking about the threat multiplier that climate change has to reproductive justice. So there is an increasing amount of peer-reviewed literature plus lived experience that is showing us we cannot ignore the urgency of climate change, and it has to be in sync with, it's not one or the other. Our environmental injustice layers of crisis moments at our communities also need to be addressed simultaneously. And by addressing one, you also benefit the other in many cases. We also work on a wide variety of child health outcomes. If you look at all the data on most chronic health, child health indicators happening right now, they're all going the wrong way. They're all increasing and or not decreasing, stagnant. And the National Environmental Health Sciences and lots of research that's come out in the last 30 years has shown us at least a quarter of these chronic illnesses are related to environmental exposures. You cannot attribute genetics to the fact that childhood cancer has been steadily increasing since 1975. There's something else happening to our children. And I'm being public health trained, you know, we always are told that there's the morbidity and mortality, and it does frustrate me because I'm wondering how many children is it going to take? You know, we have more children living through childhood cancers, but then there's a whole host of other challenges. You're more susceptible for other cancers. The treatment, as we know, is very harsh. It also involves many harsh chemicals. You know, infertility, there's a range of other issues that now our children face. Where we stand is if we can prevent childhood cancer and other long-term illnesses, we certainly need to do that. So we're part of the Cancer Prevention, Childhood Cancer Prevention Initiative, and also the Cancer-Free Economy Network, with the recognition that our dependence on chemicals in our economy has to also be addressed, again, simultaneously. We didn't get into this overnight. It's not going to happen overnight, but there is an unfortunate dependency, at least on the US economy, for the production of these chemicals in such a magnitude of ways. We do a lot of our work in coalitions. So we're part of the Clean Water for All coalition that also is looking at exposure pathways through all types of forms of water, including drinking water. We're part of the Healthy Air Partners. So we really lean in on other partners in the space so that we all kind of lend and strengthen our capacity together, whether it's government relations, communications, branding, education and training. We all kind of work together so that we can be stronger and really making sure we're expanding our reach. We also work on built environment issues, so places where children spend majority of their time, homes, childcare, schools. We run the Eco Healthy Childcare Program, which for 13 years now has been training and educating childcare professionals, owners, facility managers, on how to work on low to no cost steps and pesticide reduction and ways to decrease the energy and the attractiveness of pests to one's indoor environment are all parts of our structure in addition to integrated pest management practices. We uplift environmental justice in all of our work. I released a report called Racism That Appends the Cradle with Jackie Patterson with the Chisholm Legacy Project. And we looked at how Black children are caught in the crosshairs of the syndemic. We wrote this at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a very emotional process, looking at how climate change, economic disinvestment, and COVID-19 have and continue to really, unfortunately, put, in particular, our Black and Brown children in higher risk than even the average child to most environmental exposures, along with many other social indicators. We also are part of research in the field. So we are the coordinating center for the National Institutes of Health Children's Environmental Health Research Translation Centers. I mean, these government programs couldn't come up with longer names, but there's 6 research translation centers in the country right now that are funded. We work to uplift and make sure that their science doesn't just stay in a peer-reviewed journal, that it is translated into public health, meaningful, standard setting, child protective actions, making sure all of our partners, lift up their work and learn the meaning of what we're learning in these science labs, and again, lived experience. And I will just mention, we're also part of the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, where we're trying to work with the Biden administration to protect 30% of our lands, our waters, and our ocean by 2030. So there's a climate implication, there's a justice implication, and there's certainly our health and child health and reproductive health implications to us protecting lands, and then also applying a Justice 40 metric, so that at least 40% of those protected areas, which has never been done before, this is a very aggressive goal, will benefit the most marginalized and frontline communities in our country that have never really gained the benefits, but have been witnessing the most harms from these lack of protections. So all of these, I would make the case, are not just working towards our child health protection, but the generational impact of working to protect or promote protection of our reproductive health impacts as well.
Oh my gosh, there was so much there. I want to, first, this generational impacts, that is so true, so important. And, I remember studying kind of epigenetics in, when I was working on my MPH too. And there is no other reason to explain some of this. It is, yeah. And then Cancer-Free Economy Network. Oh my gosh, that is what we are talking about here, and both of you have mentioned kind of this working the focus on the bottom line and working around the margins. And we have to be real about this, right? It is money that talks. And there was so much there, I think, in overlap with some of what the center does. So that was just fabulous. Thank you so much. So over to you, Tyrone or Dr. Hayes. I know I'm back and forth about what to. So at various...
Tyrone is fine.
Okay.
That's what my mama named me. The rest is just a title.
You told me that before, I know. Okay, so at various points in the film, we learn about endocrine disrupting chemicals. And I'm kind of throwing this at you because it wasn't one that I had originally put in there, but I actually think that we might need a quick little primer on endocrine disrupting chemicals. And then tell us about your career and how it intersects with all of this work.
So what endocrine disruptors describe are chemicals that interfere with hormone production. And sort of in a historical perspective, when people talked about the safety of chemicals in the environment historically, they talked about, does this chemical kill things? They talked about LD50, so the lethal dose at which 50% of the population would die. And safety was based on things like LD50, which doesn't sound appealing to anybody, that you're going to use something at a level where you're estimating that half the population would die, but there were safety factors that were put in place for chemicals that would allow it to be on the market. And then I guess people started to think about cancer. So these are chemicals that might cause cancer, which wouldn't kill you directly, but the long-term exposure might result in an increased mortality, or a mortality at a lower age than if you hadn't been exposed. And so that's how sort of the safety of chemicals in the environment was evaluated up until a group of professors, but in large part a scientist and professor here at UC Berkeley who coined the term endocrine disruptor. So endocrine disrupting compounds are compounds that you might be exposed to at doses that won't result in death, that won't necessarily result in cancer, but the long-term exposure can impact things like reproduction. So for example, many of these compounds might interfere with hormones that lead to fertility, or that lead to the ability to carry a pregnancy. And so these are things that might not kill individuals, but especially if you look into environmental health and exposed animal populations, over time, populations will dwindle and be eroded because their reproduction is being inhibited, or any number of things. It might be predator avoidance behavior. It might be a stress response that doesn't allow you to respond to disease disease pathogens appropriately. And so people never thought about these more, I guess what some would say, more subtle effects of chemical contaminants that may occur at levels that were otherwise thought to be safe. Now, and you asked about in terms of my career, I'm a developmental endocrinologist, so I'm interested in how hormones regulate reproductive development and reproductive physiology. My research specifically focuses on amphibians, but I'm also interested in general on animals in general. Amphibians are a model in many ways for us humans. And in being interested in how the role of hormones is involved in reproduction, for example, the role of estrogens in female fertility and reproduction and the ability to produce eggs or carry babies, I got introduced to this idea that these chemical contaminants can interfere with that process and have major impacts on individuals and ultimately on populations. And so that's why I've gotten involved. I guess
fabulous.
I guess I should say I specifically worked with the industry to study a chemical called atrazine that works by not mimicking an endogenous hormone, but it functions in animals to increase an inappropriate production of estrogen in individuals that can lead to things like lower fertility, reproductive dysfunction, and malformations.
So you were seeing this on the industry side of things.
I was being paid by the industry, that is correct.
Okay.
By a major player, by Novartis, which at the time was the #1 agrochemical company in the world. And at the time, atrazine, which has now been replaced by glyphosate or Roundup, at the time was the #1 selling agrochemical in the world.
Well, it's amazing that it can be going on that long, and there is a whole body of research around this, and it continues to persist. So thank you for kind of giving us that biology and chemistry background for those of us that aren't well versed in endocrine disrupting chemicals. All right, back over to you, Brian. So there was a section in the film where a woman was trying to prevent the spraying of chemicals on a local baseball field. So I'm always curious to ask directors, are there any stories that have come, are there conclusions to some of the stories? Is there a second phase to the story since the film's been out a while that you could share with us? Kind of what's happened since you concluded filming?
Sure. Well, since I finished the film, Kim Conte, the woman in the film, who's the executive director of Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, they're just blowing up. They're going all over the country helping any community, whether it be a small town or a large city, figure out how to shift away from synthetic herbicide and pesticide use to an organic, what they call IPM, which is an integrated pest management program. So they're just keep doing that. And then I've been working with them intimately with the film, where they're taking the film and going into communities and saying, here you go, here's an 84-minute piece to wrap your head around this whole issue. So it's been really wonderful to partner with organizations like that. And I've seen some incredible things happen where we've screened the film and then there's this direct action that's happened. Just in my own community, I've had 3 screenings in Napa County. And after one of the screenings, one of the largest winery owners in the Valley contacted me and said, hey, I wasn't able to see the film. Can you send me a link? I sent him the link. The next day, he called me into a meeting. And the meeting was to let me know that he told me, he said, the film pushed me over the edge. I'm converting everything we have to organic. And that doesn't happen at every screening, but something happens, whether it be people coming up to me saying, you know what, I'm going to work on a policy to get it out of our parks, or I'm going to change the way I shop. And then we've been using the film as well to garner support for a state bill in California that unfortunately didn't pass. It made all the way to appropriations, but it would have allowed every county in the state to tell Caltrans whether or not they could or couldn't use synthetic pesticides in their county on roadsides. So, and that was my whole goal of making the film, is being used as a tool for action. And I continue to. Just earlier this week, it screened in Cape Town, South Africa. And a woman reached out to me from Cape Town, and she explained, and I didn't know this, but Africa has really been the dumping ground for the chemical industry. So when a chemical, say like DDT, gets banned in the US, they take whatever they got and they move it to another, developing country. And so they've been dealing with a lot of issues around synthetic herbicide use with Roundup in South Africa. And so we provided them the film. I put them in touch with organizations in California that have organic integrated pest management policies that are organic. And they had an event and it went well. And now they have a whole plan in place to change policy in Cape Town. So those are just a couple examples.
That's fabulous. I mean, that's what you hope, right? That's like your goal of this.
Yeah.
And I will say,
oh, can I just add one other thing? And it's very interesting too, just to hear how every community I've worked with on screenings have a different issue. When it screened in Vashon Island last year, it was an equestrian center that was dealing with the issue of horses getting cancer because they spray so much Roundup on the trails. And then, in other places, it's a lot of HOAs where, they're using Roundup to keep all the grounds clear. So everyone's kind of got a different take on it. And, I'm just going to keep pushing the film out there because I see change happens.
Yeah, and there's actually really something to that, I feel like, because you can impact policy at that very local level, like you said, whether it's your school board and the spraying of a field or, your HOA. And some of those wins are the best, and then they snowball into the bigger wins. So that's fabulous. Great, Brian. So Nse, over to you. You have held so many leadership positions nationally and regionally. I couldn't share them all in your bio. But so what are the top problems that you think we should be doing advocacy around? Like, where should people go next after this webinar?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I mean, we get asked this a lot for the only nonprofit of our size and our kind and our mission in the United States. Everything you can connect back to children's environmental health. So you do have to narrow to be effective. A couple things I would offer. We have a voter's guide, Children's Environmental Health Voters Guide, and it is, while we are a 501c3, we lobby a little bit of our time, which we can do lawfully, usually for budget appropriations, making sure that our government agencies that are working to protect children continue to have their budgets and other public health focused areas. But the voter's guide is supposed to be for us, the general public, to use it with campaigns to encourage our elected officials to take a public stance on where they fall in at least 6 areas that we identify high level in that voter's guide. We also hope it will be useful to you as a voter out there and to share among your other networks, because what I would say is that elections matter. If we have not seen that, we clearly see that, and we have a kind of erosion happening among especially our younger voters. I have a few in my own house who are very dismayed and wondering if their votes truly matter with so much other corruption happening. So I would also add campaign finance reform is also one that many of us in the justice community are fighting for, because a lot of the same old just cannot continue to happen. If you lose an election, you lose an election, right? And it should not be bought, period. So I would stress that. And then climate change, back to climate change. So there are city and state plans, climate action plans, if you will. And there are efforts that we can all be doing individually within our communities, within our spheres of influence, and certainly, again, as the voting public, whether it's public health standards or others. So energy justice and thinking about our energy decisions, and when we can and have an opportunity to provide retrofits and take advantage of many weatherization and home improvement programs. They vary by state, but there's a lot of money out there through the Department of Energy that a lot of us are not tapping into. And many of them have barriers, by the way, that we are constantly trying to let our federal partners know. They're kind of confused as to why there's not too many people using them, especially in the most marginalized communities. And there's a lot of hurdles to jump through at times, but I would encourage looking to them. Incentivizing mass transportation. Transportation is a big part of our air pollution problem, which also contributes and is exacerbated by climate change. And of course, the intersections between our reproductive health and most vulnerable populations are all there, again, under climate change. I will say we did an assessment maybe a year ago, and there are some climate action plans out here that don't even have the words children in them. So if you don't even have the words, so that means that you probably didn't have someone like us at the table when you were developing that plan. And we all know that a plan is only as good as it is in the planning, and any implementation of a climate plan is going to be usually during a disaster, very stressful situation. So at the very least, we're trying to make sure that vulnerable populations, pregnant women, women of childbearing age, reproductive considerations, and children at least are involved, because there's a much different level type of support that is needed for them. I would also say, if you haven't heard about it, Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act. This has been a bill introduced by Senator Booker in New Jersey over a year plus now. And then recently it was quietly introduced in the House finally as a counterpart bill by Representative McGovern in Massachusetts. Now, it hasn't even had a hearing yet, so it's got some time to go, and clearly the House has its own issues happening. But it's focused on addressing foundational weaknesses in federal law and the pesticides registration process that have resulted in U.S. approval of numerous pesticides already banned by many other nations, as Brian's wonderful film has identified. And the bill proposes important changes to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act to better protect frontline farm workers, children, agricultural communities, and harmful, potentially lethal pesticide exposure. So if passed, and given the light of day to at least have some hearings where we can get on the record, it would be the most protective policy yet in federal history, talking about the protections of children and reproductive considerations due to pesticides. I will also mention the Farm Bill. I think many of us are thinking that the Farm Bill is not likely to pass, unfortunately, this Congress, which is a disgrace, but it's also a result of the major woes that we've been having at our government level. However, the other side of that is it offers an opportunity for all of us to, when we see that final bill language, either connect with organizations like ourselves or others who are following this bill very closely. It has so many moving parts, but what we're already hearing is that it's going to be weak on protections of pesticide. And if a farm bill cannot talk about or be a platform for protections of farm workers and their families, then I don't know what is. We're missing a huge opportunity, and it seems like a lot of us need to be on the record for that. And then finally, the Sackett versus EPA Supreme Court case. I'm not sure how many know about this. This is also a disgrace. One of the many ridiculous, in my mind, Supreme Court decisions made over the last couple of months or a year. And this has a long history, but pretty much it's industry, oil, coal, mining versus the Environmental Protection Agency. And unfortunately, the EPA lost. At the end of the day, our definition of our wetlands and our protected waters and streams are now adjusted so that they can benefit polluting facilities rather than allowing the EPA to do its job and regulate and then fine and do all these things it needs to do, which is how this all started. We once again have a set of industries who believe that they are above the law, that they are above any other type of regulation, and that totally is not going to be okay. There's a whole coalition of us, faith-based, public health, research, justice, community groups, climate groups that have been and will continue to do what we can. And it's my understanding there's going to be some legislation introduced about this. But that is something else. If you haven't heard about it, we need as many voices to let our elected leaders know this is not how we expect to have our futures and to conduct ourselves.
Wonderful. Oh my gosh, it went from like the individual, make sure you vote, to like straight up hardcore, difficult advocacy around all these, campaign finance reform, everything. I will say that's great. When you have a minute, will you chat some of this to Malia, and we will make sure these things get in the follow-up email. And there was the other report with the Chisholm project. I would love to be able to share that out too.
Sure.
And I will just say, we did an analysis of gender and reproductive health in climate plans, and the same thing was true. It's just not included. So that's interesting. You're finding the same thing. Well, Tyrone, I'm going to go to a question in the chat because it was similar to one that I was going to ask you, I think. But it really focuses on these large corporations. So Peter says, the horror from the film was that 125,000 lawsuits against Bayer Monsanto. How are these cases impacting this company? Are they going to be put out of business? You know, is this on the scale of the opioid epidemic? Talk to us about the corporations and especially your past experience.
No, I mean, this is a fairly distressing and depressing point, is that these companies are large. They're multi-billion-dollar corporations, and in many cases you have, I mean, I can give you examples of where you have nonprofit organizations, non-government organizations, nonprofit organizations that are pursuing change and pursuing lawsuits against the companies, but they have infinite resources. They sue the EPA, for example. So even though the EPA is supposed to be regulating many of these companies are actually suing and putting pressure on the EPA, which, in my experience with atrazine, the chemical that I work on, actually makes the EPA it weakens them so that they don't want to respond because they don't want to risk a lawsuit or bad publicity. I learned, this might sound like kind of ignorance, but I learned what the term lobbyist meant. Really, I mean, we know what it means, of course, but I learned in the few times that I've been able to leave my job to go speak before a state legislature, or speak before Congress, or speak before the EPA. But the company has a lobbyist there, these companies who's there every day saying these chemicals are great, the voters want these chemicals. And on the other side, like in my case, maybe I have once a year that I can go and do something, but they have this sort of infinite resources. And those resources translate to dollars and votes, and it can be a very depressing aspect of this whole problem.
Yeah, and it's, we work in so many areas, right? And so it's whether, as Nse was saying, fossil fuels and those corporations, and yeah, it's a little endemic in our culture, society, economy, regardless of the field. So
on the other side, there's power in the many. So the more people, I worked with Keith Ellison when he was in Minnesota state legislature, and he said, even if it's little kids, everybody who emails me, everybody who sends a note, these are potential voters. That helps me understand what people really want. And that's the company's paying people to do that kind of thing. So we really have to come together and take on that responsibility to voice what we want to happen. So it's a daunting challenge, but that's the only way that we're going to, make a change happen, I think.
Go ahead, Brian.
Can I add something to this? So since I finished the project, I've learned a couple things about how Bayer has been responding to this, because they bought Monsanto. Is that even though, they're paying out all these lawsuits, they're still making a fair amount of money off of Roundup. And that's why they haven't, gotten rid of it. But where they're really taking a hit is in brand recognition. Every time they get bad press, every time they lose lawsuits, their Bayer stock has been dropping. So they inherited, a huge liability by taking on Roundup. So in my mind, the more we can get the story out there, not just my story, but whatever it takes to get the story of Roundup out, it does have an impact on them financially. And I think that's what it's going to drive them to change. And the thing that we have to be very careful about with the change is that they keep saying they're going to pull Roundup for consumer use. They've been saying this for 2 or 3 years. They haven't done it yet. But what they're going to do is, or what they've said they're going to do is, they're going to remove glyphosate, which is the primary active ingredient. But what they're going to replace it with is just as bad. So we just have to be very careful about, that gets into sort of the greenwashing aspect of it.
Yeah, I know when we were doing the report, one of the things I learned, right, was that we needed to regulate these classes of chemicals, because when you just regulate one of them, they're just going to put a new one in there that's just as harmful. So yeah, it really is so multi-layered. But that is another question that we got. So folks, feel free, we're kind of winding down here. So if you have additional questions, please put them in the chat for us. I have more that I could continue to ask, but one of the questions that we got from registrants was, yeah, this idea of greenwashing and exploiting people's trust. And I also want to kind of leave us with some hope. So maybe from each of you, you know, is there like individual preventative hope, things we can do, and is there like a system kind of you know, how do we address these corporations' hope? Anybody can jump in there.
Thank you. I mean, major hope motivator for me, again, I'm a mother of 4, but I've always had a passion for children who cannot vote. They don't necessarily have a voice, depending on, you know, younger children. Our youth, if you will, our youth led movements, especially in the climate justice space, have been huge and continue to be. But there are other movements that our youth are leading, and we need to be listening to them. So they continue to provide endless hope because they're frustrated, justifiably. They know what burdens we collectively are leaving because of really poor decisions. And there's a lot to carry, not to mention, you know, will they have Social Security in the future? Can they, what will the economic situations be? You know, all of that. I mean, our 20-year-old wonders what his life is going to be at 35. That's 15 years from now, right? That's not the type of future that any of us should want for any child, whether you have them or not. So hope is our children, right? Hope is listening to them, learning, innovating, and joining with them and listening to their desires to not have us recycle the same perpetual types of harms that they then are the burdens of. I think there's lots of individual actions we can take at varying levels, regardless of who you are, the zip code you're in, and we have to be realistic with that. There's a bunch of retirees in this country looking for things to do, right? There are many groups like us who would love to have every single one of you listening join us in our movement. We call it our Children's Environmental Health Movement. We have lots of ways to plug in, whether you have 5 minutes, an hour, 20 hours of a week, we will find a way for you to plug in and direct your energy and attention, because as we've all been saying tonight and today, numbers matter, right? We might not think we're making a difference, but together in magnitude, we matter. So hope also is exemplified in the people that I have the honor of working with and among every day, and the families we have the honor of serving every day and serving as a voice when maybe they can't. We happen to be on Capitol Hill in DC, and we don't take that lightly. We actually take that to our advantage, but it's not the only game in town. So I would strongly encourage active communication with your elected leaders at your local level. As was mentioned, their job is to listen to you. Emails, telephone calls, visits, if you're able to. Many of us do know groups that pull together, you know, public health, community, health professional, you name it, groups coming together so that we can all support, but it comes from a different angle. When you have more and more and more magnitudes of that, we will, and history shows we will have a tipping point. We have a listserv, we have all different kinds of ways we can connect. We have Children's Environmental Health Day, but also become a part of educational campaigns. It's still fascinating to me that while the threshold of learning has definitely increased since I've been working in this, there still are generally people out there who just still make these gross assumptions that we are better protected than we truly are. And again, it makes me frustrated to even have to say this, but for now, while many of us are working on larger policies that should hopefully create the type of systems and consumer products and whatnot that would not harm us, we're not there yet. So we need to be continuing to educate ourselves and our public and our families on decisions that they're making and just things to look out for. There are a lot more options out there on the market than there used to be, and more accessible and more streamlined type of stores, not just high-end stores. So it's frustrating. There's a lot better labeling at times, right? So read your label, you know, take advantage of at least what we're given for now, even though it's severely inadequate, I will say. So those are just some of the things and aspects that give me hope that what's our alternative, right? And our children are expecting nonetheless, and we cannot fail them.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Brian, Tyrone,
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. I always want to end on hope, and the thing that I always put out to audiences is that they can be a part of this movement. If you live in a community that you feel is being impacted, contact me through the website childrenofthevinemovie.com. And this is my full-time gig. It's just working with people and organizing screenings, bringing in panelists from their community that can specifically talk about what's going on for you in your community. So I'm going to be doing this for, I don't know, probably another year. I'm going to Washington, D.C. in April to support Booker's federal piece of legislation. So, I started off not knowing where this was going to go, talking with our mayor and board of supervisors, and now I'm going to head to D.C. in the spring. So, and I'm not a pro at this. So, yeah, give me a call. I'll provide you everything you need to put on an event where you live.
That's wonderful. Tyrone, I want to leave you with the last word here.
Well, I think most importantly, I'm just proud to have been a part of this conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing to be a part of the conversation and helping bring science to people who want to use science in using their voice to make things happen that needs to be happening. I mean, there's power in numbers, and we need to speak truth to power, and to use another cliche, vote with our dollars. That's what hurts them.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, go science. Thank you for mentioning that. I mean, we are the Center for Biological Diversity. We have a team of scientists. So it was just wonderful to have you. And I know we didn't get into the amphibians too much, but there was probably like a whole other webinar we could have just about this impact on these species that you're so, I watched your TED Talk and you're so attuned to the amphibians. So
Well, there are many things to unfold. So
I know. Literally, we'll have, round 2. Brian will have a second film. Yeah, you're going to make a film about going to Washington, right? You're going to meet Nsé there. She's on Capitol Hill. It'll be like Brian goes to
Let's
Washington.
do it. Let's do it,
Part
please.
2.
I will be in touch.
Well, we've got just a few minutes here, so I am going to conclude us. But I just couldn't have asked for a better comments from you all, because we really see the root causes of extinction, pollution, and climate change as the same forces of systemic oppression and the marginalization of humans. So we really do hope this film and webinar series is leading the way for more health, environmental, and economic groups to work together, which I think is exactly kind of what I just mentioned there to Tyrone. So please reach out, folks on the call. If you want to partner on any thing, Malia's putting my information in the chat. We would love to talk with you. As I said, if you're not registered for the rest of the series, Malia is also going to put that in the chat. So we're going to be talking about plastic products. And the webinar is going to include an OBGYN, a frontline community representative, and a policy expert from UC San Francisco. And so as I mentioned in my welcoming remarks, we're simultaneously working on supporting this economic transition, one that embodies values such as solidarity and cooperation, equity in all dimensions, social and economic democracy, sustainability, and pluralism. And I will also add to the follow-up email, our environmental health department just worked on an action alert regarding EPA and some of their pesticide work that they're doing. So we are going to have all kinds of things for people to take action in the follow-up email. So I want to thank Malia and Fabiola for helping with tech. I want to thank our panelists, Brian, Nsé, and Tyrone. Your work is so necessary. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Thanks to those who are watching. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email that will have a recording and closed captions with transcriptions, that certificate for continuing ed credits if you need it. And again, all these ways to take action. So when you close out, there should be a short evaluation. We would really appreciate it if you would take that. And I just got to say thank you to everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you as well, Kelly.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
All
Kelly.
you.
You all take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.